I was inspired by a conversation with one of my clients who is articulate and smart and just always on the ball, very knowledgeable, very experienced. And he was mentioning an incident with his CEO. It wasn't even an incident, a conversation with his CEO. They were planning for an upcoming executive offsite. My client is a CHRO. And the CEO had said, "Hey, can you plan the offsite?" And he says, "I'm on it." And he just walked away. And as he was talking to me, he's like, "Can you help me brainstorm it?" And I was, "Great. What do you know about what the CEO wants?" And it was kind of like a shameful moment of like, obviously I should have asked. Obviously, all of these things. And that got us to this topic of middle school me was showing up in that meeting with the CEO where you just kind of want to be liked and you want to be kind of serving of others in many ways, right? Like you're worried about, am I within with the popular kids? Do they like me? Am I doing the things? And you just sort of become almost a yes person in that moment. What drew the thread into making it into a newsletter was that I had like 3 client conversations all within quick succession where they all talked about, hey, a different version of me as a VP, as a CXO is showing up with the CEO. I'm not like this with other people. It doesn't happen with the rest of the executive team, but it is happening here in this room
Yeah.
with this one particular person. And this is what the newsletter is about, is there's kind of a few reasons that seem to be behind why we get into this mode, this appeasement element. One is around there is a genuine power gap. You know, this person has power over you. They might determine whether you keep your job. Staying in their good graces feels very logical. The second is a lifetime of training. Many of us grew up in cultures or households where we were raised to defer to whoever was above us in whatever way, shape, or form that looked like. And so that conditioning doesn't just evaporate the minute that you become an executive. And the third is perfectionism. You know, many of us don't want to come across as seeming like we don't know the answer, that we have half-baked ideas or progress that's in play. And so it feels safer to kind of hide away rather than kind of expose what we don't know or what's not happening. But that's sort of the setup for the newsletter topic this month.
I love it because that is definitely something that our HR audience will connect with. We are a direct report to the business leader. We're usually not the top decision maker. Somebody else is doing our performance review. We, serve at the pleasure of that leader. It's interesting to me that, some of the language is around being liked and the cool kids. And I actually think a little bit more about like the formal elements of power. Like I want the good rating and I want the good raise and I want to get the chief instead of the VP versus director versus SVP. And like, I want to be valued and recognized as such. Maybe I defaulted more towards the formal aspects than the social aspects.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think with my clients, the thread was on a bit of the likability element of it and wanting to be from that social piece that I didn't emphasize that nearly as much, but I love you're bringing up because it's true. We do want the raises and we do want the good ratings. And for those of us who got straight A's our whole lives, that continues in the form of performance ratings and part of what makes it so hard to have performance discussions with people for sure.
As you were talking, I was flipping through some of the required and supplemental readings for People Leader Accelerator. We have a dedicated week on politics and influence. And there's some really interesting academic research from Robert Cialdini, from Patterson, from Jeff Pfeffer. People often kind of default to the Machiavellian concepts of I'm like climbing over the bodies of my competitors and feel like it's a very icky kind of thing. But just being aware of these power dynamics can help us operate in them more effectively. It doesn't mean we need to operate in an icky way to win, but if you're just aware of, hey, here's why my peer might be reacting to the CEO saying XYZ, and here's why I may be reacting to these things, it'll give you more perspective to operate more effectively.
Yeah, there's a coaching/therapy framing that I think can be helpful for people, which is the story I'm telling myself is, and the story I think they are telling themselves is, right? Just to kind of highlight that we do come from these different perspectives. And I like that you're pulling out that politics doesn't have to always be icky. There are certainly icky people that we probably encountered in our careers who are political and Machiavellian, but I would say that is not the every executive that is out there. Most have relatively good intentions, relatively good motivations. I remember one big aha for me in my career, though, was that what motivates us is different. And sometimes it's the clarity of like mission driven versus somebody who's financially oriented, somebody who really cares about process efficiency, or somebody who just genuinely cares about the people. And understanding that we were coming at it from different angles or for different things that we were optimizing for really opened my eyes because I came in, I think, pretty naive of like, we're all in it for the good of the company and I will sacrifice anything in my department to help your department kind of framing, which I think is what in an ideal world you kind of ideally want more executives to be doing, but it's not natural instinct and it's not necessarily that we're trying to be mean or rude. It's just how do we get everybody on the same page of in what we're working on and how we're working on it. And one of the things that I encourage executive teams to think about is can we just have a very articulated version of expectations? And it sounds very basic, but the thing that's fascinating is the number of times that I've mentioned it, I've gotten almost as many responses of like, well, what do you mean? Can you give me an example? Because it's like, what would I put in that?
Yeah. And whatever you put in it, you better live by it too.
Mhm.
Like you can actually do a lot of harm by saying that we do things this certain idealized way and then you live it a different way and that breeds a lot of cynicism and don't do the work if you're not going to be real about it.
Yeah, because a lot of what does go into it is very idealized, right? Like we are a first team, and therefore I would respond to another executive before I respond to my teammate. Or when we are budgeting, we think about the company's needs for the budget before our own. And then when you actually get into the midst of it, I think that is where it does create a higher expectation of how people will act. If it's not being reinforced, if people aren't being held accountable for it, then it does, to your point, create a different set of emotions and dynamics in that mix.
I come across this a decent amount in mission, vision, values, and culture work. And yes, you can and you probably should be aspirational about what you want, but it should still be grounded in reality of who we are. And so that's a tension that's worth observing. Observing that word makes me think of something else. Our friend Brad Harris, when he and I are teaching classes together, he asks students explicitly to stand on the balcony and observe what's happening around you. Try to pull yourself out of the immediate emotion or reaction and observe who cares about what, who's working on what, how other people are interacting with each other, like what the big picture is. He keeps using the word stand on the balcony. And I think that's kind of an interesting concept of giving yourself a little bit of distance to get perspective on what's happening in the situation.
I talk about going to a higher level. If you're at ground level, you're noticing like in a neighborhood, whether the grass has been mowed or the garbage man picked up the garbage. At every level that you go higher, whether to the tallest building in the neighborhood, to do you hop on an airplane and start overlooking the city, you pay attention to different things, right? The traffic patterns across the bridge, or if fog is rolling in, or thunderstorms are on their way. And I think that is helpful for a strategic element. But to your example here, is really helpful too from a dynamic element to take you out of not necessarily minutia, but like your observations when you're on the balcony are just different and out of the fray, maybe more so than when you're in it and in the midst of it.
Which may give you the perspective as hopefully a more fully formed adult, so you don't fall into the middle school version of yourself of trying to be the pleaser, trying to be the A+ student to just execute quickly versus sometimes pushing back, sometimes asking more questions, getting a little bit of perspective.
One of the things that I firmly believe is that if you play the pleaser, you're not actually the best executive version of yourself because you're optimizing for something that's not in the business interest necessarily. You're just optimizing to be liked, which is a very self-oriented optimization. Being liked is a byproduct of other things as opposed to the main thing that we should be optimizing for.
There are some other connections there. So like being liked is one thing, being trusted to do good work on time? Will you do what you say you're going to do? Will that transaction feel good? This is something I talk about with a lot of the folks that I mentor and that go through the PLA program. And you probably do the same in your coaching, of thinking like an executive is often results in acting very differently than the A plus individual contributor that just delivers. What a ton of HR people do that ends up taking them very far, and often the head of the function and often director level plus, is doing all the stuff, being super responsive, being the A plus student, doing it really, really well, often thinking ahead a little bit about what would be needed. But it's usually around execution and responsiveness. But that ends up petering out. I just had a conversation earlier today with somebody thinking about PLA that said, we want to 5X the company. We want to IPO someday. I'm the head of the function. I've got a great relationship with the CEO. And the CEO says, I need more executive presence, and says, I need to be more effective around the executive table. And I'm the only female, and I'm 20 years younger than everybody else. And how do I get that? I feel like so much of it is what you work on, what you talk about, how aware you are of what other people care about. You can't ask to be told what to work on and expect to be a fully fledged executive at the top level. It's more about being self-directed on the things that matter.
You're absolutely right. When we think about executive presence, there is a component that gets overlooked. And I remember there was a public company where a new CHRO had come in, and the prior CHRO had been there for ages, from the early startup days through multiple years past IPO. And the new CHRO coming in was very experienced in public company. And his team was kind of perplexed because he'd been there for a month and he hadn't spent virtually any time with the team. He spent all of his time with the board, with the other exec members. He was building relationships across the organization. And that inversion of time is really fascinating, because in early stage startups, in roles where it isn't as necessary to be at that super executive presence, the time is spent more on the execution. You're doing a bit of anticipation. You are involved in strategy, but maybe someone's directive on, hey, these are the key programs we need this year. And more, what we see with the leaders who are at larger organizations, more mature or public companies, is that they are reading the room. They're spending an inordinate amount of time with other executives, with the board members, with customers, with pretty much more people than outside the team. One, because they're trusting that their team can do the execution that is on the ball to kind of keep up with what's needed for the business. But to your point, they're trying to read the room. They're trying to understand the landscape so that they can play the executive role to be able to anticipate what's going on.
Yeah. Patrick Lencioni, author of Five Dysfunctions of a Team and The Advantage and all these other great books, he talks about team number one concept. And you mentioned it earlier. If you are focused primarily on your own team, your own department, your own function, then you're setting your team up for bloody and unwinnable battles with other groups, because then you will operate like the United Nations, where each member will advocate for their own group without really thinking about like what's best for the common good. And when organizations are most effective, the heads of each function are thinking about their number one most important team as being that executive team cross-functionally. And what is the collective good? What are the collective goals? That takes perspective to understand what that is. HR listeners, it probably takes a little bit of financial acumen. Doesn't mean an MBA, but understanding, how your company makes money and what groups within your organization drive that and what they need. Having that perspective, standing on the balcony, can be helpful.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the last note coming to mind around executive presence is that oftentimes people's first instinct around presence is this physicality to it, like the way that I sit or stand and my posture, and the way my facial expressions are, how I'm using my hand gestures in this moment. But so much more of it is actually an internal inner game type of thing, where having clarity of what I stand for, what I understand about the business, the role that I'm playing in this room, what I bring to the table, or what role I should be playing within this team, That clarity is actually one of the things that helps create a sense of confidence, an inner reason why I'm doing the thing I'm doing. And that will convey through that physicality. And for me, real presence is the matching of the inner confidence with the outer, and for those to
Mm.
match up. Because I've seen leaders being coached for just the outer without thinking about the inner side. It causes, if not a lot of a gap in imposter syndrome, because you're now then like, great, my outside looks awesome. And I still feel just as young or, inexperienced or whatever the thing is that was causing our confidence to have a bit of shakiness before, that wasn't allowing us to show up in that way that we were supposed to. And now I just have a veneer. And is it like, are we putting lipstick on a pig kind of moment, as opposed to, hey, no, I actually deserve to be in this room because I have clarity on why I'm in this room that allows me to show up in a way with executive presence.
Yeah. You will naturally have more confidence, at least I will, if I know the content, if I know the subject matter, if I have confidence in the content. I wonder if it's interchangeable. If you have confidence in the context, you might be able to get away with being less comfortable with the specific technical content. So if you're in like a trusted group, could you learn something new like AI tools? And you feel like more willing to be curious and experiment and fail, versus if you're an AI expert and you're standing up in front of hundreds of people, or an HR expert, could you stand up in front of a bunch of people and talk about your subject matter? I wonder if there's some like sliding scale there around confidence and presence.
I'm hearing a thread around, if I have psychological safety,
Ooh, yeah.
does that allow me to feel more confident? I'm running through the scenarios in my head, and I think to a large degree, yes. Like the idea of getting up in front of thousands of people has always freaked me out. When I've done it, it's only gotten easier if I have to do it a lot, because it's a muscle that I'm practicing, and then I get more confident in the context. But the idea of like, if I had psychological safety, that no matter what I say, no matter if I mess up, that people will still be like, I'm rooting for Jess, or, we're just so glad that we're all here together. I think that would help. I think that would actually help a lot.
Hey, professional services firms, there's maybe some rubric out there to go create and sell between psychological safety, enabling curiosity and experimentation, versus confidence and executive presence, and how you show up in a room. And not just for professional services firms, but for HR professionals that want to be more successful executives. Like, how do you manage that dynamic? And usually the answer is intentionally. Be aware of the dynamic first, and then you can do something with it.
Absolutely. I think awareness is typically the first step to anything of, do I know if it's happening to me? Do I know when it's happening to me? And then do I know why? And how do I create a different path or defaults in my system than the natural instinct that I have? How do I start to build the muscles for the reaction that I want to have in that moment?